The village beyond the mountains. Yuki always had a passion for more unexplored, hidden areas of Japan, far from modern civilization. Then, one day, he heard about a remote village that held its festival only once every 10 years. Yuki went to visit it. When he arrived, the air was crisp, and the whole village seemed untouched by time. The villagers welcomed him warmly, offering him tea and traditional meals. It was almost as if one had entered a dream world, the kind of place you never wanted to leave. When the sun set, Yuki was invited by a villager to celebrate the day's activities at the village square. She had her own fiddle and played for all. Laughter and the smell of delicious food cooking over an open flame danced around Yuki like playing angels. I found something special, Yuki thought. But night was falling, and he could tell something was amiss. The villagers all wore blank, mask-like faces. It was a festival, he thought. It couldn't be weird. But there was something strange about the masks. They seemed concrete, smooth, almost skin-like. Yuki tried to shake his doubts and enjoy the festivities, but the longer he stayed, the more uneasy he became. The villagers moved in jerky movements, their laughter straining, and every time he turned away, they seemed to come closer. When one of them handed him a mirror, he stood stiff. His face had disappeared and was replaced with the same expressionless mask the villagers wore. Frightened, Yuki tried to flee, but every which way he went, he ended up being led back to that middle square with all those expressionless villagers surrounding him. It wasn't until they closed in on him, revealing a mask that looked suspiciously like his own face, that Yuki finally realized that the village was no hidden paradise. No magical, protected world where one could escape reality, but instead was a trap, a place where people went missing, their identities consumed by the faceless beings. 2. Whispering Woods Ayumi was an unbeliever. A reporter, investigating journalist, the truth seeker always in search of facts rather than folklore. And yet, no other story made her feel such an urge to enter the infamous Whispering Woods of Aokigahara, where those strange disappearances are observed every year. The dark and eerie forest was also quite dense, but Ayumi would not let them unfold her skepticism. As she continued walking through the forest, she was able to lose the sounds of the outside world. It was very natural because there was nothing but complete silence except for the rustling of leaves. But then she heard the whispers. At first they sounded like the trees whispering back to each other as the wind moved through them, but soon they grew loud and clear, as though someone said her name. Curiosity pushed Ayumi deeper into the woods, listening to the voices. She thought it was just the wind, or some trick of the mind, but somehow the whispers seemed too deliberate. She followed the voices to a small clearing, where there stood an ancient shrine. Ayumi couldn't help but approach it, noticing a figure standing in the shadows. A person, but their face was a featureless void. Ayumi's breath stopped short in her throat. The whispers swirled louder, surrounding her, driving her forward. She wanted to turn back and run, but something kept pulling her in. Faceless figure raised his hand, calling her forward, promising answers. But as soon as she stepped closer, the ground beneath her feet was gone, and she swallowed by darkness of forest darkness. A camera owned by her was later found to be abandoned at the edge of some woods. The only thing captured on the footage from the camera was a forest of trees, but one could hear the whispers faintly in the background. The Whispering Woods Ayumi was a skeptic. An investigative journalist, she had always been much more interested in facts than folklore, but assignment to the mysterious disappearance in Aokigahara, the infamous Whispering Woods, may have changed that. The forest is a dense canopy of dark, eerie woods. She was more interested in debunking the myths surrounding it than facing whatever was lurking. Inside those woods, the sounds of the outside world faded. There was just unnatural silence, punctuated by the slight rustle of leaves here and there. Then she heard the whispers. They were like the wind at first, whispers through the trees, but they grew louder and clearer and louder still, like someone was calling to her by name. Curiously drawn into the forest by the voices, Ayumi followed them deeper and deeper. She tried to convince herself it was just the wind, a trick of the mind, but the whispers were too deliberate. They led her deeper into the forest to a small clearing where an old shrine stood. As she approached it, she could see in the shadows a figure, a person, but their face was a featureless void. Ayumi's breath caught in her throat. The whispers grew louder now, as if they were circling her, urging her forward. She wanted to turn back, to run, but something inside of her kept pulling her inward. A faceless figure raised its hand, beckoning her forward, promising answers. But when she went closer, the ground beneath her feet just disappeared, and she was consumed by the darkness of the forest. Her camera, later, was found abandoned by the side of the road and edge of the woods. Footage captured would only show trees, but through them, faintly, whispers could be heard. The unseen road. Takashi was bone-weary. The work had been long and hard, and all he wanted was to go home. Something was decided. Continue on the main road to turn left onto the back track, a twisting, thin asphalt that cut across the forest. It was quicker, quieter, and he'd done it 1,000 times. Tonight, though, it was different. As he drove, the road appeared darker than it should have been. The trees seemed taller, their branches brushing over the road like claws. His headlights flickered, and for a moment the radio went to static. He pushed it away and focused on the road ahead. That's when he saw the sign. Don't look back. That was odd, but Takashi laughed off his suspicions. Still, a shiver went down his spine. He looked into the rearview mirror, and there, standing in the middle of the road behind him, stood a woman. Her long black hair was covering her face, and didn't move. Takashi's heart was racing. He blinked, and she vanished. For some time, he wanted to believe it was just his imagination. Yet every time he checked in the mirror, she was there, closer every time. He panicked and floored it, speed down the road. No matter how fast he went, she kept appearing, her face still obscured behind her hair, till she stood right behind him in the back seat. Takashi rammed on the brakes, swerving off the road. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying in the open field. The car nowhere around him, the road behind him completely gone. He was alone, stranded there, and the only thing he could hear was the rest of the trees rustling so far away. The Whispering Woods. Ayumi was a skeptic. An investigative journalist, she had always been much more interested in facts than folklore, but assignment to the mysterious disappearance in Aokigahara. The infamous Whispering Woods may have changed that. The forest is a dense canopy of dark, eerie woods. She was more interested in debunking the myths surrounding it than facing whatever was lurking. Inside those woods, the sounds of the outside world faded. There was just unnatural silence, punctuated by the slight rustle of leaves here and there. Then she heard the whispers. They were like the wind at first, whispers through the trees, but they grew louder and clearer and louder still, like someone was calling to her by name. Curiously drawn into the forest by the voices, Ayumi followed them deeper and deeper. She tried to convince herself it was just the wind, a trick of the mind, but the whispers were too deliberate. They led her deeper into the forest, to a small clearing where an old shrine stood. As she approached it, she could see in the shadows a figure, a person, but their face was a featureless void. Ayumi's breath caught in her throat. The whispers grew louder now, as if they were circling her, urging her forward. She wanted to turn back, to run, but something inside of her kept pulling her inward. A faceless figure raised its hand, beckoning her forward, promising answers. But when she went closer, the ground beneath her feet just disappeared, and she was consumed by the darkness of the forest. Her camera, later, was found abandoned by the side of the road and edge of the woods. Footage captured would only show trees, but through them, faintly, whispers could be heard. The road with no end. 4 college friends were behind the wheel, cruising through rural Japan in their car. They had decided on a late-night drive back from a weekend trip. Many of the stories associated with this mystery road had surfaced by claiming that it never actually ended. Not one of them believed that it could be true. That was until their journey down what seemed to be an endless road. The trees were thicker on both sides of the road, their branches intertwining above their heads. It was pitch black out. Apart from the luminous spot of asphalt illuminated by their car's headlights, nothing else existed. They crossed the same bent tree and the same broken sign repeatedly. At first they thought they must be lost, but it soon became obvious that something else was wrong. The road would never end, no matter how far they drove. Slowly the gas gauge was dropping, and there was never an apparent end to the road. Panic was brought on when one of them spotted a figure on the side of the road. This man was walking slowly with his face covered by a wide-brimmed hat. They sped up, trying to outpace, yet the man was still appearing, this time closer. No matter how fast they drove, he was still ahead a few paces, and he always looked at them with a face that they could not describe, just like the road itself was alive, playing tricks on their brains. In the last few miles of their trip, as gas was exhausted and the car rolled down onto the highway, stopping in front of them, the figure stood right in front of their car, blocking their path. No one was behind them. The highway stretched endlessly. Too late did the friends realize that they became part of the legend. The stranger at the shrine. On the 3rd day, Hana and her friends were rambling in the countryside, finding narrow roads and small villages in search of adventure. That was what it was for an old shrine deep in the forest. They stopped there. The air was heavy, the trees casting long shadows over the weathered stone steps leading up to the entrance. As they approached, he saw someone standing by the shrine with his back to them. He was wrapped in a worn kimono, and he didn't stir, didn't even acknowledge their presence. One of Hana's friends called out to him, curiosity getting the better of her, but he didn't stir. She felt a sense of unease about the man. He was standing too stiff, too motionless. Hana took another step forward to get a better view. However, as she turned the corner to face him, her breath caught in her throat. The man had no face. Smooth, blank skin replaced where his features should have been. His friends laughed with fear, but believed it to be some kind of sick joke. But the longer they looked at him, the more they fell in love with the faceless stranger. He somehow sucks them into his mouth, leaves their thoughts behind, their identity. Hana's memories are drifting away from her head, her name forgotten. They try to leave, but find the path is gone, dense trees felled. The stranger, thus far silent and faceless, waits still. It was only at the beginning, as they were starting to forget why, that they realized the shrine did not worship or pray, but rather was a trap. The faceless boy Keiko was just as drawn into the rural village traditional festivals of Japan. She was a photographer, out for anything unusual and beautiful in nature. More than most people got wrong, she had frozen moments. When she attended one small festival in a village, captivated by the colours and atmosphere since everybody there was having so much fun, though amidst the crowd, she saw something rather odd. A young boy standing alone and staring back at her. His face was always in shadow, no matter which angle she tried to photograph him from. She thought it was the light at first, a trick of the sun. But the boy kept appearing in her photos, always in the background, always faceless. No one else seemed to notice him. When she asked the villagers about the boy, they grew quiet, avoiding her questions. Keiko's interest became an obsession. She started trailing the boy, bent on capturing his face in one shot. And the closer she got, the more distorted her photographs were. The blank face of the boy filled the frame and warped the images into something unnatural. It was only when she saw him standing in the reflection of her own lens, faceless and waiting, that she realized the boy wasn't just a ghost, he was far worse. And now he watched her from the corners of every mirror, every shadow. The dark road to Kiso. It was past late, and the road they were driving down barely allowed for the passage of their car's headlights. Riku and his friends were heading for Kiso, a small village situated deep in mountains. Trees blocked both left and right, casting weird shapes at night as they wound through mountains without ever seeming to stop. There was no GPS signal for hours, and the only guide now was this little road ahead. Not since an hour ago had they passed another car, and the feeling of seclusion started to creep in. That is how they spotted it. A tiny, dimly lit roadside shop front of them, the neon sign of which flickered in the dark. They pulled over gratefully, wanting to stretch their legs. The shop was seedy. The windows were dust-coated, the shelves bare, a relic of a woman behind the counter. Her face cowered in the shadowy corner of the shop, but not her eyes. Those were cold and piercing. She said nothing, just looked at them, her face unmoved. Riku and his friends bought a few biscuits, when just as they were about to leave, the woman spoke in a very low, raspy voice. "Don't look back." Dumbfounded, they turned their heads away, attributing the whole thing to the ramblings of an eccentric old lady, and got back into the car. But as they drove off, a part of what she said still bothered them. The road ahead was all the darker now, and trees seemed to close in around them. Riku couldn't help but feel that something was not right. Gazing at the rearview mirror, he froze. There, standing in the middle of the road behind them, was a form. A tall, shadowy figure of a man. Faceless. His form flickered and out, as if he wasn't there at all. Panicked, Riku hit the gas, careening down the twisty road. But every time he glanced back in the mirror, the figure was a little closer. His friends began to notice it too, and the tension in the car became unbearable. They tried to rationalize it and said that it must be just a trick of the light, but something inside each of them hinted that it was terribly wrong. It seemed that no matter how many miles they drove, the figure never faded. It was always there, drawing nearer and nearer. The car air grew cold, and the radio crackled with static. Finally, they came into a small clearing in which the road split into two. Riku slammed on the brakes, unable to decide which one to take. In the rearview mirror, the faceless man stood directly behind the car, reaching out toward the trunk. Without thinking, Riku turned left onto the curving path, and his tires squealed as he took off. The figure vanished, and they thought they had lost him. Only continuing down the road told them something far too terrifying. They are in a loop. The left path had come around to where they started, and the roadside shop stood before them once again, its neon sign flickering in the blackness outside.